In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. Amen. Glory to Jesus Christ. Glory forever. Welcome back to Orthodoxy 101. And today we're on class 24. And as a reminder, you can find all of the classes not only on the Facebook feed for this parish uh, page, but also you can find it on our YouTube channel. And you can find the links to that at our webpage. And you go to the upper right, and you'll be a link to both Facebook and to YouTube. So you can find that. So today we're going to talk about fasting in the church. And this is one that for many people who come from outside the Orthodox tradition and come into the church, as at first seems a little bit daunting. And it's a way in which we have to kind of explain what it is about fasting and why we fast. And there's a lot of misunderstandings about it as well. So, what I'm going to hope to do is kind of give us a good foundation on fasting so that we can understand it and integrate it into our life. I will say that I get a lot of questions for people as they enter into the faith, as well as people who are Orthodox already about fasting and the fasting rules. And it's certainly something that we need to all do. It's an essential part of being a Christian. It's one of the few times in the New Testament and that Christ actually commands us to do. He commands us when he says, when you pray like this. When he does the Lord's Prayer. And when do forgiveness, you do it like this. And then the other one that he talks about is when you fast like this. So it's not just one of these things that is considered optional in the church, but is something that's essential. And it's essential in the sense that it's deeply rooted in who we are as Christians. And if you go to like traditional Orthodox countries, uh, you'll notice that even during the fasting periods, you go to the restaurants, they don't have that same menu. They keep the fast. So these are things that are important. So again, very important. There's a wonderful story from one of the great saints of the church, Saint Seraphim of Saroff, and a mother came to him and wanted advice on how to find a husband for her daughter. And this was the advice that Saint Seraphim gave. He says, before all else, ensure that he whom your daughter chooses as her companion for life keeps the fasts. If he does not, then he is not a Christian, whatever he may consider himself to be. So that's how important it is. It's considered in the church is to keep this fast. In other words, if someone is an Orthodox Christian and keeps the fast, it's an essential sign that they're following what the church is saying. Um, so it's important for us to kind of keep that before us. Again, it's not something that it's commanded to us by Christ, but it is also something that we are voluntarily asked to do. And we're going to get into that as we continue onward. Why is it so important, and why is that voluntary portion of it so important? Because ultimately, it's not about keeping rules. It's not about, and there are plenty of rules in the Orthodox Church about fasting. It's about how you're orienting your spirituality, your spiritual life. I don't like the word spirituality. I like the more properly speaking, it's spiritual life. And not only that, but then how serious are you taking the discipline of being a Christian? Um, and that's incredibly important. So again, it's not this outward sign, nor is it something that we're Pharisaic about, but it is something that's essentially important about what we believe a Christian and how a Christian should live their life. Um, and so it is very much about the inward part. I think one of the great ways to start is to take from the scriptures, and Matthew 6:16 is a lesson. In fact, the whole Matthew 6 is a great lesson on how to be a Christian, and you should read it, because these are the great commands that Christ gives us about prayer and fasting and forgiveness and all these sort of things. And so, how to be a Christian is really encompassed in that whole section. But in Matthew 6:16, this is what he says: When you fast, this is from Christ, do not look somber as the hypocrites do, for they disfigure their faces to show others that they are fasting. Truly I tell you, they have received their reward in full. But when you put oil on your head, wash your face, so it not be obvious to others that you are fasting, but only to your Father who is unseen. And your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. So, very important, because fasting is not to be saying, "Oh, look at me, I'm fasting," and "Oh, it's so hard," especially when you're like about the fifth week of Great Lent, and oh, and and Christ says, "Well, they've already got their reward," but that's not how you're supposed to do it. You put oil on your head, another make yourself look shiny and bright, and be joyful, and do it in secret. Don't let people know the level of your fast. In fact, the only person who should know is your spiritual father, your father confessor, and your family, obviously those who are fasting. So don't go around telling people. But the lessons are very important here. And this is kind of the foundation of where we start our discussion. First lesson is that we are to fast. It's not something that's sort of optional. There is an Old Testament witness to this idea of fasting. Christ talks about fasting. These demons can only be cast out by prayer and fasting. I mean, time and time and time again, it goes through that. So it's not something that is just sort of offhandedly remarked. It's something that's very serious and very directed. So first thing, fast, because Christ says, when you fast. Second thing is be joyful in your fasting. And that may be difficult, but you need to be joyful, thanking God. In fact, in the Old Testament, the Israelites would fast as a way of thanksgiving, as a way of joy, as a way of giving thanks to God for their deliverance. They would fast, they would give something up in remembrance of God. And so fasting is something that is joyful, not somber. The third thing is you do it in secret. In other words, you don't let people know you're fasting. Don't talk about it, just do it. And don't judge others on whether they fast or don't fast. You just do it. I often say to people in the church, we don't talk about prayer necessarily. We pray. We don't talk about fasting in the church. We fast. So words and words and words can come out. But if you're actually not doing it, and that's most important in church, is that we do what we are saying we're supposed to do. So that's a very important. And again, this idea of not judging others is very important. We'll come back to that later. But Romans 14 states, "Accept the one whose faith is weak without quarreling over disreputable matters. One person's faith allows them to eat anything, but another whose faith is weak eats only vegetables. And one who eats everything must not treat to contempt the one who does not. And the one who does not eat everything must not judge the one who does, for God has accepted them. Who are you to judge someone else's servant? To their own master, servants stand or fall, and they will stand, for the Lord is able to make them stand. One person considers one day more sacred than another considers every day alike. Each of them should be fully convinced of their own mind. Whoever regards one day as special does so to the Lord. Whoever eats meat does so to the Lord, for they give thanks to God. And whoever abstains does so to the Lord and gives thanks to God. For none of us lives for ourselves alone, and none of us dies for ourselves alone. If we live for the Lord. And if we die for the Lord. So whether we live or die, we belong to this Lord. For this reason, Christ died and returned to life, so he might be the Lord of both the dead and the living. So what is the Apostle Paul saying here to the Romans is it's not your place to judge. And if someone fasts because they can do it, thank God. And if someone is weak and cannot fast, thank God. If you live for God, and if you don't, if you and everything is supposed to, and you die for God. So all these things are supposed to be around God. So in other words, the key word here is don't judge. Okay. So now we're going to move on with that, because we're talking about don't judging, but yet we do have rules, and this is part of the key point. Fasting is ultimately intensely personal. It it's something that we make that decision. And the church gives us this guidance, and it gives us this way of looking at fasting, and a way of setting rules around us, not because these rules are something that's supposed to be oppressive, but rather the rules are there to liberate us so that we don't have to make it up, that we don't have to think it through, that it's already been done, and it's already, we walk on a path that's already been trod. And so we don't have to kind of doing it. I remember reading once a pamphlet, a very small pamphlet written by an Orthodox priest, and it was called Lent as Liberation. And isn't that a wonderful way to look at it? Not as Lent, like, oh, here it comes, and oh, brother. But Lent is a liberation. Why? Because we're liberating ourselves from the bonds of this world. We're liberating ourselves, in a sense, when we can be slaves to our stomach, or slaves to our passions, or slave to whatever it may be. Lent is supposed to bring that into focus. And when it's brought into focus, we have a clearer view of who we are, and we have a way to see it. Um, and we have a way of seeing ourselves, and this is incredibly important, because I think anybody who has taken the fast seriously knows there's that point, if you're not long-term fast like Lent, that you're weakened. And when you're weakened, you start, the kind of passions come out, and then you get to see what you really need to combat. That if you never take that point, you never go into that battle, you don't know what to fight. And so what fasting helps do to us is help us learn how to fight that which is within us. Um, I mean, just think about it in a practical sense, right? You sit there, you eat a big meal, and what do you want to do? You want to lay on the couch, right? You want to veg out. In my family, you call it the anaconda mode. That's growing, that you like, you just ate a huge meal and you just want to lay there and digest it. And so, if your stomach is full, then in a certain sense, my brothers and sisters, you don't have that opportunity to do what you're supposed to do. You won't pray to the level you're supposed to. You won't do all the things that you're supposed to do. You won't even clean the house because you know you're too full. But fasting sharpens all of that and gives us that opportunity. And of course, now with medical science, they're confirming everything the Orthodox have been talking about for 2,000 years. About taking periodic fasts for your health, watching the foods that you eat, um, being careful on the amount that you eat. All these sort of things that are supposed to be part of healthy living. Well, the Orthodox have been talking about that for 2,000 years. So it's kind of interesting. But the other thing that's very important is that fasting should never be seen as an end in itself. It's a means. And it should never be done just by itself. Fasting should always be accompanied by prayer and almsgiving. Why is that important? Well, as we talked about, being in anaconda mode, you can't do the prayers. But when you do fasting, you need to augment it with prayer to God to give you strength, to look for repentance, to look for all those things in your life. And it gives you that opportunity, again, to flee to prayer so that you strengthen your body and your soul. The other thing is that fasting also should be accompanied by almsgiving, which is something that many people forget. For example, St. John Chrysostom talks about in one of his letters about fasting, and he sees it as, well, you know what? Give up, when you're fasting, the money that you save that you're not spending on food normally should be put aside and given to the poor. And that if you're fasting and you're giving up a meal, for example, you take that money and you buy a poor person a meal. You said, because that's all part of that spiritual exercise. You see, again, fasting is not a rule. It's not all of these sort of different things, but ultimately it's about the strengthening of the spirit, the strengthening of the soul. It's about getting to be back to what you originally mean to be. So it's an extensive sort of way of doing it. In fact, St. John Chrysostom goes further on in his letter on his commentary on fasting, and he says it's the medicine that heals us, and it's the medicine that heals us, which spiritually ails us. That's an exact quote that he talks about. And so we must know how to use it, because it's a medicine. You can misuse medicine, and we know how to do it and make sure it does good and not more harm. Um, Sometimes people who are new to the faith, and they get very excited about being Orthodox and all these great new adventures that are going on in their spiritual life. and they'll overdo the fasting. And it's very common to see this. They're going to really do the fast. They're really going to do it right. And then by about the first week of Lent, with all the services, they're starting to pass out or they're doing some other things. I remember I had one particular parishioner who really was going to try the monastic fast during Holy Week, which is pretty much not eating anything, and he just couldn't do it. It was just too much. Well, of course, I can't expect any of you to go out there and run, for example, a marathon. You have to train yourself to run that marathon. You have to build up the stamina. You have to build up the exercise. It has to be part of that. So to go and immediately try to do the fasting to the way that the church gives its fullness, and again, the church always uh, kind of exhorts us to reach the most that we can do, not the least of what we can do. It takes time, so you got to build it up. You got to strengthen it. Each fasting season, you build up a little bit more, and sometimes you'll do better, and sometimes you won't do so well. But over time, you build it up and grow and grow and grow, and then it becomes something that just becomes sort of automatic. Um, so when you're looking at implementing your fasting rules, um, talk to your priest. You talk to him and you get guidance from your priest on how to do it and what to do, and to what level. And sometimes the priest may say, yeah, I'm not sure if you're ready for that. For many people who grew up Orthodox in a particularly pious Orthodox home, it just becomes an automatic. You don't even think about it anymore because that's all you've ever really known, and that's part of it. But it didn't just happen by accident. It became something that was developed, and so you develop it and move forward on it. St. John Chrysostom also goes on to write about fasting. About it's not just the food. He says, if we can't control what comes in our mouth, how can we control what comes out of our mouth? And that's an important thing as well to consider. But he also says it's not just about the food; it's about our whole body. In other words, you fast with your eyes, and you fast with your ears, and you fast with your mouth, and you fast with your actions. All those things is part of it, and that's something we should be doing all the time, anyway. But particularly during these fasting periods, he exhorts us. Watch what you say, watch what you see, watch what be careful of what you hear, be careful of what you're doing. Fast with all that body. In fact, he writes, fasting is the change of every part of our life because the sacrifice of the fast is not abstinence, but the distancing from sins, not the absence from sins, but the distancing from sins. Therefore, whoever limits the fast to the deprivation of food, he is the one who in reality abhors and ridicules the fast. Are you fasting? Show me your fast with works. Which works? If you see someone who's poor, show him mercy. If you see an enemy, reconcile with him. If you see a friend who's becoming successful, do not be jealous of him. If you see a beautiful woman on the street, pass her by. In other words, not only should the mouth fast, but the eyes, the legs, and the arms, and all the other parts of the body should fast as well. Let the hands fast, remain clean from stealing and greediness. Let the legs fast, avoiding roads which lead to sinful sights. Let the eyes fast by not fixing themselves on beautiful faces, and by not observing the beauty of others. You are not eating meat, are you? You should not eat debauchery with your eyes as well. Let your hearing also fast. The fast of hearing is not to accept bad talk against others and sly defamations. Final thing. Let the mouth fast from disgraceful and abusive words, because what gain is there when on one hand we avoid eating chicken and fish, on the other we chew up and consume our brothers? He who condemns and blasphemes is as if he had eaten brotherly meat, as if he had bitten the flesh of his fellow man. It is because of this that Paul frightened us, saying, if you chew up and consume one another, be careful that you do not annihilate yourself. And that's one of my favorite lines. We fast for meat, but devour our brothers. If we can't control, again, what goes in our mouth, how are we going to control what comes out of it? So, fast with your eyes, your ears, your mouth, your actions, and then food, right? That's the easy one. It's all the other ones that are difficult, right? I mean, just think about on a daily basis go through, what we see, we turn on the TV, we listen to the radio, what we read, how we interact with one another. That's where the fast needs to begin. If we can discipline that, then my brothers and sisters, then abstaining from just meat is easy. Um, so you must train and learn, build up year after year, grow into fasting. I remember there was a retreat of some Orthodox clergy, and Mother Gabriela of Holy Dormition Monastery, one of the OCA's Romanian monasteries. Here we had all these clergy here, all these priests. We were all mission priests actually, and I remember her. And it was during this retreat we always had right before the Great Lent, and I remember very very clearly. And Mother Gabrielle is just a lovely sweetheart of a person, and she's an abbess, so she's like I talked about in the last class. Abbesses they have their way. She kind of got up and she was giving the class, and then she stopped and she looked at all the clergy and she pointed the fingers at all of them and said, "During Lent, don't talk about food." We all kind of, what do you mean? And said, well, think of, and then she said, think about it. When you talk about food, you start thinking about food. When you start thinking about food, you start thinking about what you like to eat. And when you think about what you would like to eat, then you think about what you're not eating. And then you start getting into this weird spiral about kind of despising the fast. And so the best thing to do during the fasting period is not to talk about food. And that's hard. I mean, we all go through this. We every Lent, we start off with great intentions. I know my wife and I, okay, we're going to really try to, do this and do that. And then you end up, you're talking about menus. You're talking about what do you want to cook, especially as Lent goes, farther on. You're like, oh, I can't have another, bowl of lentils or whatever it may be. And then all of a sudden, you're really despising the whole Great Lent. And that all because you were talking about fasting and you were talking about food. So that's why it's not good. Because remember, what happens when you fast is you're being stripped away. You're being stripped away of so many different things, and your true self starts to come out. And then you find your obsession with food or your obsession with this or with that. And all of a sudden, you're challenged. You're challenged, and you have to learn how to deal with it. So again, be very careful about that. Saint Clement writes a lot about this too. He talks a lot about this fasting. He even gives you what foods you can eat and what you can't eat because, and of course, it's according to the science of that age. There's one they don't eat lima beans because they look like an ear, therefore it's like cannibalism. That's you but more importantly, he's talking about watch the food you eat, watch what you can and cannot eat, and be cautious, but don't talk about it. Don't obsess over it. Just do it. So again, we have to do fasting with joy. So let's before we get into some actual rules on the church, let's summarize. Why do we fast? One is to regain control over our bodies so that we control it, that it does not control us. Two, to simplify our life. We fast, so that we don't spend all this time and money on extravagant meals and etc. We do it so that we can simplify our life and what we are. It lightens our load so we can pray, right? Literally, full stomach, you can't pray. It lightens our concerns, you don't think about food, you just eat food, that type of thing. Um, it's about discipline, about how we can discipline ourselves. It's about abstinence. What can we say no to in our lives? It's about purity, purifying our lives. Um, some of the church fathers will talk about fasting, keeping the full fast like the monastics do, was the way in which we were meant to be before the fall. That's why it's often said that the monks lived the angelic life, that they, but by eating just what God provides to us in a simplified way, then we are living in a way that God intended us to do before we fell. And it's a good preparation for any effort. That's where that idea of prayer and fasting, where it's linked together. And I know of clergy who, if they have a parishioner or a fellow priest who is going through some serious surgery or something like that, they'll spend the day in prayer and fasting for that. They won't eat anything, they'll pray, and a kind of a way to kind of focus their prayers towards God as a good intention. And that's a very humbling thing, when you're sick and someone, talks and said, I prayed all day and I fasted all day and while you were going through your surgery so that, know that my prayers were really with you. I was really focused on what it was that you were doing. And so that's a wonderful thing. So let's get on to some more exact questions because I think we have a good foundation here on fasting. So the church actually came up very early on in the rules for fasting. In fact, one of the early church documents, the Didache, which is called the teaching, the way of teaching, and it already in there it says, that you're to fast from meat on Wednesdays and Fridays. Wednesdays being the day of the betrayal, and Friday the day of crucifixion. And it actually gives it very early on. Again, this predates the Bible even being put together. Already early on, is the church is telling us fast on Wednesdays and Fridays. And according to the Didache, I'm not quite sure about it. Um, the Jewish people had fasted on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and this was a way to kind of differentiate themselves, however you want to take that. Other church fathers, again, very early on, had began to expound on this. And the church calendar, as it got worked on and rounded out, this idea, this discipline of fasting became more and more established. So you had the Wednesdays and Fridays, then you had the four major fasting periods. We'll get into all of this. You had special days in which were total fast days, what they call strict fast days. There were days which wine was allowed, oil was allowed, some days during the fasting period when fish was allowed. So all of this was worked out over time, basically according to a monastic discipline. Remember, monastics fast from meat for their entire life. So these were different ways to discipline them. So, um, and it was not meant, again, I have to emphasize, as oppression or control, but rather to assist someone in working through this. In other words, the question like I get, well, how should I fast? Well, rather than each person coming up with their own way, the church said, well, here is the blessed way in which to fast. Here's the way in which, here's the path that you can follow. And so it became a way to assist them. And it became an essential part of the spiritual life, fasting. Um, and it was key because they didn't want to make it up. There's a wonderful short story. Chekhov was a son of a deacon, and he was some deacon, I can't remember. And so he had a very great insight into the church life, and many of his short stories revolved around different aspects of church life, like confession and things of that nature. So there's this wonderful story by Chekhov called "The Murder." The Murder. Okay, so think about this. So it's about two brothers basically who didn't like their priest. They thought, and they didn't like him to the point that he didn't do the services correctly, he didn't do this correctly, he smelled, he did this, he did that. And so they were going to create their own church and they were going to do everything perfectly. They were going to keep the fast perfectly, they were going to keep the vigils perfectly, they were going to do all those things the way that it's supposed to be done. Well, in the end, one brother kills the other brother because the other brother had oil on a Friday. So Chekhov was kind of like saying, like, this is the hypocrisy that can happen because of fasting. So if you ever want to read the story, The Murder, it's well worth reading and seeing that. The one brother is supposed to be so great and so Christian, yet he kills the other brother. So be careful. So what do we mean by fasting? And it's not just, you hear, oh, what are you going to give up for Lent? Oh, I'm going to give up chocolate, or I'm going to give up TV, which is all good. Those are all good things. But that's not really, and it could be a part of it, but it's not the essential part of it. It's based on a monastic rule, so you have to remember that. And so fasting generally means, abstaining from certain foods. So what is the first food? Well, meat is the easiest one. And we mean meat, we mean beef, chicken, lamb, all that sort of thing. Um, poultry, lard, anything that broth, anything that has a meat derivative. Um, it also, if you go into the monastic, it also means, and in certain times, fish with a backbone. What do we mean by that? Fish with like a regular fish, right? That you see. So that, so when you see fish fast, I'll show you in a second the calendar. We're also talking about that. It also means olive oil and wine. Why olive oil and wine? Because those were luxuries. Those were luxuries, and so that again, that was a way of giving up something that was luxury. So at certain days, you will say fish, oil, and wine. What that means is you're still in the fast, the meat fast, but you also have sort of a lifting, a lightening of it. You can have some olive oil, you can have some wine, you can have some fish. It also means dairy. This is a tough one for many people. Dairy is in so many different things, and we mean dairy. Mean any milk product, cheese, and eggs is considered dairy. So when you're in a fasting period like Great Lent, you're supposed to give up meat, dairy, and all those other sort of things. Usually people work, they'll do meat, but they'll do dairy, or they'll do both meat and dairy, first week, last week of Lent, whatever it may be. Again, talk to your priest about what's the best way to do. I once heard saying, and by the way, certain foods are always okay, and you'll be surprised to hear what foods are always okay. Lobster's okay, clams, mussels, they're always okay. Why is that? Well, that was kind of considered junk food in the early. Now it's considered a luxurious food. In the early church and in the time, that was junk food. Like no one ate that stuff. And a lot of it you could just pick up. You didn't have to do any work for it. You could just go and pick it up off the beach and then make it. And so I always find it ironic that what we consider today as kind of like fancy food was actually considered junk food and is always allowed in fasting. It doesn't have anything to do with the blood issue, with the Jewish regulations. It doesn't have anything to do with that. But it was considered junk food. So what did the monks eat? Basically, boiled vegetables, grains, wheats. You know those type of things. So when you go to a monastery, don't expect great feasts. But they do amazing stuff with that, by the way. Um, Bread, things of that nature. So those are always allowed. I heard one time in tongue in cheek kind of saying, well, if they were making the rules today, fast food would probably be something like a hot dog because it's considered junk food. Not really, but anyway. So anyway, it's also important on the number of meals you make, the size of the meal, the way in which it could be prepared. So in other words, um, if during Lent or one of the fasting periods, get rid of one meal if you can't fast from, say, if you're a vegetarian or something like that, then give up one meal, or even just normally just learn to give up one meal and then give that money to the poor. Don't make huge meals, during Lent. And sometimes that's hard. We go to different churches and we have celebrations and they make all this food, all this, Lenten food for everyone to eat. And that's wonderful and great. But, try not to make huge meals. Um, be careful on how you prepare those meals, right? Sometimes you'll use lard or you'll fry something in oil. Try to avoid that if you can. Again, simplify. Um, but don't become parasitic about it. I know people who have gone into the store and they're looking at the labels and they're making sure there's no whey, which is considered dairy, in the food or whatever it may be. When you get to that level, you need to be careful what you're doing because you're becoming very parasitic. In other words, don't go out of your way to eat that food, and don't go out of your way to plead ignorance about that food, but don't go out of your way to be kind of like reading every label. Use your best common sense on that. Uh, so when we talk about fasting, we're talking about meat, dairy, and in some cases, fish, wine, and oil. Those are the things. Now, you can be exempt from fasting for three reasons. Reason number one, and this is very important. If you have medication that you need to take, and sometimes medication you're required to eat something with it, then you take your medication and you eat what you need to do. Obviously, don't gorge yourself, don't take advantage of it. Do what you need to do necessary. Like for people who come, they have to fast before church. You're supposed to fast, not eat before you come to church from midnight to the time of communion. Well, some people need to take medication. They need to take their pill and they need to drink some water. That's perfectly fine. There's no problem with that. The second one is that if you're traveling, this is always a great one. If you're traveling, you may not have those same sort of availability of fasting food when you're out there traveling around. So you get kind of a dispensation. But if you knowingly, in other words, you go to a place and you can see you can get a tuna sandwich as opposed to a hamburger in the airport, then obviously you want to go for the tuna sandwich and not hamburger, and we mean traveling, not like I'm going between here and church, you know, we mean like serious traveling. So again, you can be exempt at times. I remember I had to fly to Rome for a conference, and it was during Great Lent, and on the airplane, that's all they served. So you just do. The third one is you eat what is put before you. In other words, you go to someone's house during Lent, and this has happened to me, and they put some, non-Lenten food in front of you. You don't make a big stink and say, "Oh, but I'm fasting and I don't want anybody, and oh, this is so offensive." You eat what's put. You don't say a word. I was in Montana, and I would do, I have people all over the state, and I would go out. One time I was at a ranch, and it was a Friday, and they brought me this beautiful steak. It was because they were cattle ranchers, so they had the best steak. I ate the steak. You don't say a word. You just do what you need to do. Don't make a fuss, and you certainly don't embarrass your host, who may not even know that you do that. Many people now, they don't have whole Orthodox circle of friends. They don't have families who don't follow that fast. You go over their place, and during Great Lent, and they're making hamburgers or whatever. You eat what's before you, and that's your witness. That's your witness. And then the church fathers say, by the way, you're supposed to redouble your fast afterwards. So there's no easy way out. Anyway, remember, fasting is a means to an end. It's not the end in itself. It's that spiritual discipline to lead us somewhere. We don't fast for the sake of fasting. We fast because it's going to lead us to better prayer and better abstinence and all those other things we talked about. So, fasting days. How do you know when is a fasting day? Well, everyone pretty much has what's called, the church calendar, right? The priest has a very extensive book called the Rubrics, which has it much more in detail. And on the church calendar, you'll see that you can see here. This is January. You can see these red. That means it's a fast day. And if you notice, most of them are Wednesdays and Fridays in January. But if you get into what's like Great Lent, they're all red, right? They're all red. But even they have instructions. You can't really see them here. Like they may say strict fast or wheat and wine oil, that type of thing. We already talked about it. That's a kind of a lightning. It's a little bit of a celebration. So you can look on your handy dandy church calendar. I'm sure the priest will usually announce when the fasting is coming up, and let you know about that. And so you do what it is, and you'll see them marked. Altogether, if you count up all the fasting days, depending on the, the length of Pascha, because that can influence other movable fasting, you have about 180 days a year that you fast. So about half the year, you're going to be fasting from meat, which is healthy, by the way. So again, you just do it. So what's the rules? Normally, unless it says otherwise, Wednesdays and Fridays, right? Don't even think about it. Just do it. You just do it. You don't think about it. You don't make a big stink about it. It just becomes part of your lifestyle. It's part of being an Orthodox Christian. It's just learning to fast without thinking on Wednesdays and Fridays. Um, and you should not eat from midnight to the time you're going to receive communion. Okay, if it's a morning liturgy. So that's your normal thing. Like at midnight, you stop. I remember as kids, we'd be at the priest's house and we're all getting ready for the liturgy the next day, and we'd all eat a whole bunch of food before midnight came. And then when midnight came, we all had to stop eating, and it was kind of fun, egging each other on. But don't eat from midnight to the time that you're going to receive morning communion. Again, if you have to eat, some people have to eat, they have a hard time with that. Some people have to take medication. Do what you're capable of doing. Talk to your priest. You know, he'll guide you on that. Again, it's not there to hammer you or to knock you down. It's there to help guide you. Why do we fast before communion? So that way, when the first thing that comes onto your stomach in that morning is the body and blood of Christ. So again, um, I see a question here. Can you address when people have health conditions that require a very strict diet? You follow whatever guidance you have from the doctor and who's guiding you on that health things. You don't make fasting to the detriment of your health because then it defeats the whole purpose. It's for your health. So eat according to what you're supposed to be. And if you have a strict condition on diet, on what you can eat, some people, for example, who are diabetic and they have to eat certain proteins and things of that nature to maintain it, then you do what you have to do. And then you redouble your efforts in other ways of fasting with your eyes and your ears and your mouth and charitable giving and prayer and all those other sort of things. So make sure that you always follow medical advice. I cannot say that clear enough. Follow your medical guidance. I'm not a doctor, at least not a doctor of the body. Anyway, so that's the thing. And again, if you have to eat before you go to communion because of whatever medical condition, then you eat before you go to communion. If communion, like pre-sanctified liturgies, which are in the evenings or the afternoons, then my best guidance is that you eat a very light breakfast or something in the morning, and then try to fast to that time in which you're going to eat. Again, if you have issues with this, just talk to your priest. He'll guide you. So, some people I know, for example, they just have to eat some sort of lunch because otherwise, either blood sugar and things of that nature get all out of whack. That's okay. Again, it's not about being a Pharisee. It's about being living a stronger spiritual life. So please make sure you understand that. So again, pre-sanctified, you should normally fast until that time. So again, don't even think about it. Just do it. There are some extended fasting periods in the church, four basic ones of varying lengths. The first and great one is, of course, Great Lent, which is the 40 days. And actually, technically, Great Lent ends on Palm Sunday, and then you're into Holy Week, so that's an extra number of days as well. So that whole 40-day period is considered a fast, and normally people will fast from meat and dairy during that time, or in some cases they'll do meat the entire time and dairy. They'll fast from dairy on the first week of Lent and Holy Week. Again, talk to your priest about that. Interestingly, when you get into Great Lent, the church gives you these sort of it eases you in there. After the Sunday of the publican and Pharisee, which is very interesting that they chose this specifically about fasting, the week prior to the week after publican and Pharisee is called a fast-free week. You're not you can eat whatever you want the entire week, Wednesday, Friday, everything, as a way to kind of say we're not being Pharisees here. Eat whatever you want. You always used to joke like on a fast free Friday, not only can you eat meat, you need to eat meat. Go ahead and do it. And then as we get closer to Lent, we have what's called cheese fair, meat fair, and then cheese fair. And what does that mean? Just farewell to meat, farewell to cheese. And that's part of the way that the church gave us to kind of clean out our pantry. So 2 weeks before Great Lent begins, we have meat fair. So that's the last day that you should be able to you should eat meat, and you should kind of ease yourself out of that and make sure everything is kind of taken care of. And then the Sunday in which Great Lent begins is called cheese fair. So that's the last day that you eat any of the dairy products that you may have. So again, you have the fast free week, then you have meat fair, and then you have cheese fair, and then you have Great Lent. And then after Pascha, and it depends on your cultural tradition, but you normally after Pascha all the way up to, I think it's the Trinity Week, yeah, up near Pentecost is fast free, so you're allowed to have, and you'll see in the calendar in some ways. So now you go back, like when you get to Pentecost, that's usually when you return back to the normal cycle of things, and so that's your Great Lent. The second long fast is the Nativity fast, and that starts on November 15th and goes all the way through uh, Christmas Day when the fast is lifted. and it has basically the exact same rules as Great Lent. And it's about 40 days as well. Then you have two other ones. One is the Apostles' Fast, and the Apostles' Fast can be tricky because it depends on the date of Pascha. If it's an early Pascha, because it goes from after Trinity Week, after Pentecost, to the week after Pentecost, which is a fast-free week, to the Feast of Peter and Paul. And if it's a late Pascha, then you can actually have a 1 day fast. If it's an early Pascha, you can have up to a 40-day fast on that. So that's a movable kind of date. And then the other major fasting period is Dormition, which is August 1st to August 15th. So those are your four great fasting periods. Um, my birthday is August 6th, Feast of Transfiguration. So my birthday was always in a fasting period, which meant I always got lobster. So anyway, so that's those are the four major fasting. You'll see on the calendar sometimes they have what's called a strict fast day. What do we mean by strict fast day? Those are the days in which you should eat little, if nothing, for that day. And there are only a few of them. I mean, obviously you eat if you have to, but that it should be very little. For example, what are some strict fast days? Christmas Eve is considered a strict fast day. Eve of Theophany, the beheading of St. John the Baptist, August 29th, elevation of the cross, September 14th. And so those are your strict fast days. And then there's one day of the entire church calendar, which is called a strict fast day, but it's a very strict fast day. It's so strict, in fact, that you don't even, it's the only day of the year that you're not allowed to receive communion. And that is Holy Friday, when Christ, you commemorate the crucifixion. So from sunrise to sunset, you should not eat anything. Again, you do what you can do. But that is a strict. It's so strict that the church doesn't even allow communion on that day. So that's what the strict fast days. And again, it'll be clearly marked on the calendar. But again, as I talked about, fasting also comes with fast-free weeks. It's a way to reward you. It's a way to prepare ourselves. Have at it, as we say. So we talked about the week after Publican and Pharisee. Bright week, all open. In fact, it's interesting. In some monasteries where the monks and nuns totally abstain from meat all the time, there are some monasteries that during Bright Week they will allow them to eat meat, which is interesting. So that's the 1 week of the year that they're everything is kind of lifted because it's that Bright Week. It's after Pascha, and that's a beautiful way to celebrate. And I know some monks in there, and they can't wait for that week. Um, Trinity Week, after the week after Pentecost, is a fast-free week. It's a nice contrast because you have that Pentecost is the first day since Pascha that we're allowed to get back on our knees, because during Pascha you're not supposed to go on your knees at all. It's supposed to be uplifting, and that's why we have at the end of the Pentecost service we have the kneeling prayers, which is the first time that we get on our knees to pray, and there's a whole series of prayers that we'll do. And in contrast to that, the first time we get on our knees, the church gives us a whole week of fast free. So that's a nice little contrast. See, they reward our efforts. So and you could see this, thinking about the fasting periods. Like for example, in the Russian tradition, the more Slavic tradition, on Chris on Pascha, you'll see all these people bringing these baskets, and they're filled with all these meats and cheeses and eggs and all sorts of things. And the tradition of that was because that was all the food that they couldn't eat during Lent. And now with the fast free week, all of this is available to us, and now we can eat it all. And it's a wonderful tradition. And in America, it's taken on a beautiful flavor because it's contrasted. I remember in Montana, I'd have people, not only have the traditional Russian baskets with the kibasi and the ham and all the different types of cheeses and stuff. And people would bring in elk meat and deer meat and all sorts of different things that they had out, that was Montanan, shall we say. And in Alaska, they had their own specific stuff. And And then we had Greek people, they would have the lamb, and it was so horrible. They would roast the lamb outside the church while the Pascha service is going on. You could smell it, and so the Greeks would bring, people would bring in lamb, and so all those different wonderful foods, and it's beautiful because when after the Pascha service and everyone breaks the fast together, and all these different beautiful foods are all the smells and all that. It's a great way to celebrate. Thank God. So, but I will warn you this, especially if you're new to the church, right? And you've gone through your first Great Lent, and you've done it, with some seriousness. And then Pascha happens, and everyone goes downstairs, and they're all sharing their baskets, and everyone's eating all this meat and all this rich food that they haven't eaten for 40 days. And then you see them all run off to the bathroom because their system can't handle that. You know, moderation on that. It takes time, and that first couple of days after the fast, I know I drink so much water because I'm not used to all the salt and all the oils and things of that nature, and I'm drinking so much water because again my system is getting used to it again. So be cautious. Don't overdo it. And again, as we talked about, there are certain days where oil and wine is allowed. For example, Annunciation normally falls during Great Lent. So, as a way of celebrating Annunciation, the Feast of Annunciation, the church will lift it. So, you can have different fish and wine and oil as a way to celebrate that. One of the things, it's something that I hadn't, growing up, I never really knew anybody like this, but certainly it's much more popular and much more extensive now is people who are already vegetarians, already vegans, or things of that nature. So, what do you do? And so, as I say, give up a meal, um, double your efforts in prayer, um, give up a particular type of food. One of the ones that's always kind of interesting is we always have these clergy, we always have these discussions. Now that we have all these meat alternatives that taste like bacon, but it's not made out of meat, or it tastes like hamburger and it's not made out of meat. And, that can satisfy your cravings for that. And we used to, and sometimes it's okay, but also sometimes you're like, yeah, we're kind of keeping the spirit, the letter of the law, but we're kind of violating the spirit of law. If you're eating, a sausage that tastes like meat and but not made out of meat. So, again, be cautious on that type of stuff. And again, sometimes this fasting goes beyond that. It goes beyond just the so eat smaller portions, give up a meal, do different things uh, in which you are going to make that part of who you are in life, and if you're a vegetarian or a vegan or anything like that. Again, sensible. Talk to your priest; he'll guide you with these type of things. And so, really, about it. I'm trying to think if there's something I've missed on fasting. I want to finish this with a particular reading from St. John Chrysostom to kind of put it all in perspective. But the most important thing I would say before we get into this again is understanding what it's supposed to be as a part of your life, what it is to be a part of who you are as a Christian. Again, this is not something that's optional. Christ commanded us to do fasting. So, how we integrate it into our lives is really important. How it is our discipline, how it helps focus our spiritual life is incredibly important. So think about, I want to end with this. So here we've gone through Great Lent. We've gone through these great fasting efforts. We've gone through all the different things that, the extra services, the prayers, the pre-sanctified liturgies, all those beautiful things, the Holy Week services, which are incredible. And we're all exhausted. And the sermon we hear on Pascha night is by St. John Chrysostom. Every Orthodox priest in the world reads that same sermon on Pascha night. And what is so remarkable about that sermon is how he focuses on the fast. And so I want to finish with that section from the Apostles' sermon about the fast. This is how he begins. If any man is devout and love God, let him enjoy this fair and radiant triumphal feast. If any man be a wise servant, let him rejoice entering into the joy of the Lord. And if any have labored long time in fasting, let him now receive his recompense. And if any has wrought from the first hour, in other words, you started fasting from the very beginning, let him today receive his just reward. If any has come at the third hour, In other words, you started fasting later. Let him now with thankfulness keep the feast. If any have arrived at the 6th hour, let him have no misgivings, because ye shall in no way be deprived thereof. And if any one has delayed even until the 9th hour, let him draw near, fearing nothing. And if any is tarried even until the 11th hour, let him also not be alarmed at his tardiness. For the Lord, who is jealous of his honor, will accept the last even as the first. And he gives rest unto him who comes at the 11th hour, even as unto him who began at the 1st hour. He shows mercy upon the last, and cares for the first. And to the one he gives, and to the other he bestows gifts. He both accepts the deeds, welcomes the intention, and honors the act, and praises the offering. So, my brothers and sisters, when we go through that and we hear that fasting, and again, not judging other people, that wonderful paschal gift that he gives to all of us. Doesn't matter where you are, where you've been, how you did the fast, what level you did the fast. That moment, my brothers and sisters, God gives us this gift of his resurrection. And so, no matter what it is, and he goes on to say, the table is full, let no one leave hungry. So, my brothers and sisters, that's how we see the fast. That we do all this stuff so that we can see the resurrection, so that we can experience that resurrection, that the table is full, let no one go away hungry. Amen. So, my brothers and sisters, we'll have a class next week, and we'll talk about another aspect of the Christian life, stewardship. So, have a blessed and peaceful evening. In the name of the Father, Son, Holy Spirit. Amen.